A code red for humanity. That's how the United Nations has described a devastating landmark review into climate change. The report says human activity is changing the planet in unprecedented and irreversible ways. Global scientists are calling for the immediate and sweeping reduction of greenhouse gas emissions to try to stave off the worst outcomes. Toni Waterman has more from Brussels.
Crackling wildfires, raging rivers, devastating storms. Global scientists warning that climate change and its devastating effects are on the verge of getting out of control. In the coming decades, temperatures will be hotter, extreme events more frequent and severe.
Climate change is a problem that is here now. Nobody is safe, and it's getting worse faster.
The new landmark report issued by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says that unless there is immediate, rapid, and large-scale reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius would be beyond reach. Even under a best-case scenario, scientists say that threshold will likely be crossed in the next 2 decades, earlier than some past predictions. No region on the planet is spared, and the blame, for the first time, being put squarely on humans, who have failed to curb their reliance on fossil fuels despite decades of warnings from scientists.
It is indisputable that human activities are causing climate change and making extreme weather events more frequent and severe.
The world's oceans, ice sheets, and sea levels will suffer the worst fate. The report saying changes already underway will be irreversible for thousands of years, as heat trapped deep in the oceans will continue to cause melting.
We are damaging the climate in such a way for the next generations that this will certainly make the socioeconomic difficulties in the future much worse than in our generation.
Despite the dire warnings, the report does offer small glimmers of hope. The worst outcomes can still be avoided if the planet can bring emissions to zero in the coming decades and reverse deforestation.
The IPCC report comes just 3 months before global leaders meet in Scotland for COP26 climate negotiations. They are facing increased pressure to show up not only with more ambitious climate goals, but also with specific strategies on how to reach those goals. Even with their best efforts, though, the planet is changing, although the cost of inaction will be much higher. Toni Waterman, CGTN, Brussels.
Many parts of the world have been hit by extreme weather events this year. Our next report takes a look at some of them.
Firefighters in several countries have been battling blazes and their scorching heat. Scientists say last month was the worst July for wildfires on record. This comes as swaths of North America, Southern Europe, and Russia continue to burn. The fires have burned down thousands of infrastructure, forcing evacuations and turning some forests to ashes. Over the past 8 months, the U.S. alone saw nearly 40,000 wildfires. Scientists warn that the rising global temperatures from greenhouse gas emissions are increasing the risk of fire conditions across the planet. With the recent heat wave, it could not have been imagined that some places were stricken by storms and floods. In January, the Spanish city of Madrid was brought to a standstill after seeing its heaviest snowfall in 50 years, triggered by storm phenomena. In April, Cyclone Seroja killed over 150 people in Indonesia and displaced tens of thousands. In July, record rainfall hit some parts of Western Europe, leaving at least 120 dead. Unprecedented downpours also hit central China, dumping a year's worth of rain in just 3 days on the city of Zhengzhou. Over 300 people died. Meanwhile, the Arctic continues to bear the brunt of warming temperatures. Greenland has reported it's the most significant melting event of the year earlier this month. Experts say the amount of ice that melted would be enough to cover the entire U.S. state of Florida in 2 inches of water. The latest United Nations report on climate change says human activities will increase the frequency of catastrophic weather phenomena, such as melting polar glaciers and rising sea levels. The report also says these changes are irreversible for centuries, in a stark warning to mankind.
The UN report examines the regional impacts climate change has had and what the future holds, and it's found that Australia has one of the highest increases in average temperature, jumping 1.4 degrees Celsius in just over a century, and that's well above the global average of 1.1 degrees. CGTN's Greg Navarro joins us now from Sydney. Greg, so a big jump in temperatures. What else did the report find, and what does it all mean for Australia?
Well, in fact, it found that the temperature jump here in Australia just from 1910 to 2020 was 1.1 degrees Celsius, so pretty significant. You have to remember that when it comes to the impacts of a warming planet, Australia is kind of the canary in the coal mine. A lot of researchers, a lot of climate scientists point to what's happening here as sort of a gauge of the impacts of that. And as a result, as the report points out, we have seen not only an increase in extreme weather, but the frequency and intensity of those extreme events. In fact, the area where I'm standing right now, it's in a national park. We're on the edge of a national park just to the north of the center of Sydney, where just a couple of years ago, you wouldn't have been able to see me very well from the distance I'm standing to the camera because of the thick bush and all of the trees. That changed in a heartbeat with this freak storm blew through here. You can probably see the roots of an upended tree behind me, where crews that attended all this afterwards said it had the kind of wind speed and the intensity that they've only ever seen with cyclones. But we're here in almost suburban Sydney, knocked out power for thousands of people, caused a tremendous amount of work. They had to rebuild part of the electrical grid to get power back on here. It is one example of exactly what this report is talking about when it talks about weather extremes. It says that Australia can expect longer bushfire seasons in the future with greater intensity, and we know too well how devastating that could be with the 2019-2020 black summer bushfires here that had devastating and deadly consequences. They also talked about an increase in heat, not only for monthly highs, but drought-related issues, as well as flooding, even dust storms that we can expect to see an increase of those. All of this back to that report painting a very dire picture of Australia's future in the face of a warming planet.
Greg, Australia has yet to follow suit in setting net zero targets. So what's the plan?
Yeah, well, look, Australia has been widely criticized for being among the top countries when we talk about emissions per capita anywhere in the world, but it has not committed to a net zero basically program by 2050. It's something that the government here has been pretty steadfast, despite what scientists and other countries have been saying. Prime Minister Scott Morrison, the Australian Prime Minister, held a news conference just a short time ago to talk about this report and kind of refute things. And in it, he made a comment saying that this thing that will solve this is not political commitment, but technology, a clear sign that this government has no plans to sign any types of agreements such as net zero agreements, despite what many of the climate scientists are saying needs to be done if we have any hope, not only here in Australia, but around the world, of actually addressing this before it's too late.
Thank you so much, Greg Navarro in Sydney. Dr. Wu Di joins us now on Skype from Beijing to discuss the report's findings. He's an associate professor at China Agriculture University's College of Resources and Environmental Sciences. Dr. Wu, we're pleased to have you with us on Global Watch. We've seen that these extreme weather events, just in this year alone, through this we've seen how no part of the world is spared, developing world, developed world, every part of this earth. So is this the downward spiral that the UN report is warning about?
Yes, scientists have found that the main reason for this year's extreme weather event is most likely due to the abnormal atmospheric circulations, which is caused by the climate change and global warming. It is like the butterfly effect, that flapping of butterfly's wing in one part of the world can cause hurricanes on the other side of the globe. And it is the same that in a small change in the complex system, like the atmospheric circulations, can have large effects everywhere. I mean, the sense that we could be sure is that extreme weather events will not become less in the future if we could not significantly mitigate greenhouse gas emissions and slow down the global warming.
Well, the report did offer some kind of hope, so if we don't take drastic action at this point and we do get to the 1.5 degrees increase, what can we expect?
First of all, I would like to point out that the above-mentioned increase of 1.5 degree is not compared to the baseline of today's temperature, but compared to the baseline of pre-industrial temperature levels. So we have already reached the 1.1 degrees above pre-industrial level now. So actually, it means that we only have less than 0.5 degree to increase in the future before we trigger the buttons. Actually, 1.5 degree increase is the best scenario we can get, and it is a goal we set actually in 2015. It is estimated that if the global temperature rises by more than 2 degrees, there will be a risk of triggering permanent damage to the ecosystem and causing non-linear response. So, for instance, we may expect a large scale of deaths of Amazon rainforest, which will completely damage the ecosystem function of producing oxygen and secreting carbon dioxide. This will further stimulate global warming and affect the entire land. In other words, once the temperature is allowed to exceed a certain point, we will not be able to control the rising temperature anymore.
That's pretty grim prospects. Well, Professor Wu, we will come back to you very soon. We want to take a look at some global reactions first. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has said the alarm bells are deafening, and the report must sound a death knell for coal and fossil fuels before they destroy our planet. US President Joe Biden tweeted, "The science is undeniable and the cost of inaction keeps mounting." French President Emmanuel Macron says the time for outrage is behind us. He also called for a deal that matches the urgency at the COP26 meeting coming up in October. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, hosting the talks, says the report made for a sobering read. And Mohamed Nasheed, the former president of the Maldives, says the report confirms climate vulnerable nations like his are on the edge of extinction.